Wealth Migrate. Thank you, Scott Picken, for creating this company and giving value to the world. Thank you for changing and empowering one life at a time. Thank you for giving us access to knowledge from people like Clem Sunter. Thank you, Clem, for the information and the knowledge that you share so freely. Anybody who would like to know more, feel free to contact me. My details will be in the description. Enjoy this presentation and the conversation between Scott and Clem Sunter, and take in as much as you can. After watching this, reach out to me and I'll tell you more of how you can be part of this wonderful movement to freedom.
Neither Clem nor myself are giving you any financial advice. We are literally giving you our experience, our opinions. We are giving you the scenarios. We're going to tell you the flags, but ultimately it comes down to you to make the right decisions for you and your family in terms of that. The second thing is, this is all about engagement. At the end of the day, you sit there and you watch, and, if you're anything like me, you're kind of on WhatsApp and on Facebook and on your emails. But really, we want to, empower people with engagement. So if you go to this link, literally wealthuniversity.org/VIP, you can come and get to ask questions. There's some incredible questions that are already coming through. So it'll take you to this page. And I'm going to refer to this page a number of times today. But our VIP room, which is the exclusive VIP room after this, so we're going to run a live webinar that everyone can be involved in, and we're going to have an exclusive VIP room. You need to join here to be part of the Wealth Hackers. So the VIP room is exclusive for the Wealth Hackers. I'll talk a little bit later about booking investment strategy. I'll talk about the 9 steps to generational wealth. But over here, if you've got questions, you can literally go to our platform. Now, this is our engagement platform, our Wealth University platform. And if you literally go in here, what questions would you like to ask? And people can literally go in and put their questions. It's free. Everyone can engage. You can see that people have been engaging already through the last couple of weeks. And my invitation to you, and Shane's going to do kindly for me, and he's going to take some of the questions that have already been put in the chat box. My invitation to you is, if you like the question, go and like it. So give it a like. Because what we're going to do is, and with my partner's help, Shane, we're going to be choosing questions based on the ones that get the most likes. So it's about engagement, so that we ultimately, get to ask the best questions based on where everyone's at. So that's the first thing in terms of engagement. For me, in terms of the journey I've taken, and I was thinking about it, and it's been a long time actually. I remember when Clem and I sat in my offices in Bryanston, and that would have been, I don't even remember, 2009, 2010. And I was fascinated by the way that he teaches people, and I'm sure Clem's laughing with a slide because it's about 15 years old, in terms of where the world was going and what the different scenarios were. But this is the first time I truly started to understand this. And for about 6 years, I followed and I watched Clem, and I said, listen, Scott, there's no point in getting all this information. There's no point in understanding all these scenarios and the flags and the probabilities without doing something about it and going and building a model. So I went out and I built a 4-dimensional model. I don't have time tonight to go into the detail. And Clem actually assisted me with building this framework upon which it would help people decide where was the right place to invest based on the scenarios, the probabilities, the facts, the fundamentals, and the systems. And it was really interesting to me because I never ever wanted to write a book. And when I shared the model with Clem, I was very embarrassed. I can remember many years ago, I sat on the model for about a year. And when I finally shared it, he was very, very kind with me, and he said, well, why don't you possibly write a book? And so that's where the book came out in 2013, Property Going Global. And what I tried to do in this book was to take these models and these scenarios and to help people make better investment decisions. There's a horrible statistic that, 10 years was out there where over 80% of people that invest overseas actually lose money. And I decided to write a book to try and help change that in terms of the process. 10 years later, my business partner, Shane, Ferreira, came to me and he said, listen, Scott, your book's outdated, dude. The world's changed. Technology's had a massive impact. It's time to do an upgrade. And I said, Shane, I'm never writing a book again. If you know what comrades are, believe it or not, I've run 3 comrades, and I'd like to run them back to back rather than write another book. But we did create a digital course. It's called Wealth Going Global. It's the 10-year upgrade. And ultimately, there are a number of different modules. So there's the power of clarity. What is your why? Why are you literally trying to invest overseas, diversify, and become a global citizen? Then your countries. How do you choose your top 5 countries? How do you choose your top 5 currencies? How do you choose your top 15 assets? How do you find the right partners and avoid the mistakes that 80% of people make? And ultimately, how do you build a wealth plan over time? And then there's a bonus module for using technology. And just to show you very quickly, if I was to go into this, literally you can go into the course, you can go and watch all the different components. You can go literally, so if you were to choose the countries, and this is really taking everything that I learned from Clem in terms of, the countries and the materials and how you actually do it, etc., in terms of the country modules. But what's important though, is when you get to the end, you can literally come down here and you can build a digital wealth plan. I saw someone actually asked in the Facebook group, how do you actually do that? And it literally goes and automatically generates a wealth plan for you. This is your own personalized wealth plan. Plus, it gives you, the investor strategy report in terms of an understanding of kind of where you're at and your investments. And it does it for residential, for commercial, and for other alternative assets. So that's where we're at. I wanted to play you a quick little video because this is an auditor out of South Africa. His name is Abdul, and he's a fascinating guy. He did the course, Wealth Going Global. And a lot of what we're about to learn tonight, it's fantastic to get the information, but how do you actually practically execute it and what do you do? So I want to share with you quickly this little video from Abdul about his experience in terms of taking this information and being able to use it.
And I'm a living example of that. In my little life journey from opening up my own auditing practice, the firm today audits the Auditor General of South Africa in terms of doing, pre-issuance reviews, etc.
So Abdul, let me ask a question to you in terms of it. So you've been very, very successful in property in your country. You happen to live in South Africa, but it could be anyone. It could be a German living in Germany, and because obviously you know the market, you understand the market, you're an accountant by background, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you went and decided to sign up for Wealth Going Global, to try and, solve a problem. What was that problem for you and why did you sign up for Wealth Going Global?
Scott, like I said to you at the beginning, I have this wealth. It's all localized. I have no exposure anywhere else on earth. Okay, so the catchy phrase from your side was going global or diversified income going global. Now that appealed to me. In other words, yes, I may be rich in this country. What happens if I'm outside? There's all types of restrictions in terms of the transfer of my wealth, my assets, wherever I may be on earth. So that appealed to me, and that really opened an opportunity or a process for me in terms of engaging in diversifying my wealth. And I must say, although I have the brains to think that out, why must I do that? Yeah, you're giving it to us on a platter. So we follow that process, and yes, we engage, and yes, we will get exposed. We have obviously since did do an investment again in property. Property is the economics, I understand. It makes sense to me. Okay, and we invested in that. And there are 2 more potential transactions on the table. Hopefully, I'll be able to partake in those as well. And yes, what I got as a product from the initial course was what is referred to as a diversification plan, where, again, one sets objectives. That becomes your dream. You commit to that and now roll it out. Yeah. Surely it won't happen next week, but as long as it happens, I think you're on the right road. And that's the path I've chosen to take. And thanks to you, Scott. One of the things you alerted us or reminded myself is that if you do things in teams, it becomes easier. Collective wisdom is better than your own limited and parochial type of ideas. So that's also something I quite enjoyed, in a sense that here's a deal. This is how it's being presented. It resonates with me. but it's thought through by others that I can relate to.
Yeah.
And that's also key, in a sense that we always can't believe that we understand everything. But in a team, each one has his good points and he knows what he's good for. And you put all of those together, you will end up maybe with a success. But if you don't have that, maybe we'll never get to success.
Yeah.
And it's never too late. The only time when you're late is when you're late. You're dead.
Yeah.
Up until then, you have a purpose on this earth, perform it.
So some nice wise words from Abdul. And as you said, it's all about teamwork. And that's why tonight is about teamwork and getting the right information. We always say to people, there's two things you need to do to be successful. Get the right information and the right partners. We've literally built Wealth Going Global to give you the right information, and we built Asset Mastery to give you the right partners. Now, if you put the two together, it's $2,500. But we've decided to copy Netflix. And literally, for $29, people can get access to Wealth Going Global and to Asset Mastery. And included in that, they also get all the VIPs. So we're about to go to a VIP session later, plus all the future ones in terms of that process. So that's where we're at. I'm really looking forward to the VIP session after we've been through everything. And I'll also share at the end something that we're doing with our family office partners, where we've worked with some of the wealthiest people in the world, and we've mapped out how they create generational wealth. So not just wealth for themselves, but for their families and for their legacy. And I'll share with you that at the end. So I want to leave you with one last story, which I think is very, very relevant, because I'm a big believer in real people, real stories. And this is what Niels had to say in terms of the peace of mind that one gets from having a plan.
Definitely, Scott. I mean, it is so stressful not to know where to go, to have financial partners and advice. I mean, just the connections that you gave us with Calio and others, bring us in contact with these people to understand it. It makes a world of a difference. It takes a lot of stress off your shoulders, weight. It's actually a very positive experience, especially in the world now with all these uncertainties. But from a human side, I mean, this was a phenomenal experience. And it happened so fast for us. But we were ready for it. I mean, because we've been sitting on this for 1.5 years, just frustrated, don't know what to do. But I believe, going forward, it's going to work out. Whatever is going to happen on the financial side, I feel that we have proper partners in you and in the mastermind and with Calio. It's a very positive experience. It's a positive, relaxing feel.
Awesome. So that just gives you an idea of what is possible when you get the right information and the right partners. But enough from me. It's time to move to the man of the moment. Clem, it is wonderful to have you here. I am really, really excited. Clem kindly sent me through some of the research. I've got all the research over the years that I actually literally keep here. I keep it printed out. I've read the book, which is, very dog-eared and with all the pieces. And now I've got all the latest. And Clem, I'm not going to lie. Now I look forward to learning about cloudy flags and clockwork flags and everything in between. And so it's without further ado that I will shut up and welcome someone who I deeply respect. I'm deeply grateful to have you here, and someone who I think most of us respect as someone that has made a big, big impact, not only in our country, but on the planet. And I look forward to you sharing what and where you think the world is going.
Thanks, Scott, very much. And good evening, everybody. I would just like to quote two philosophers which are in the book that Scott showed you, Thinking the Future, which was published by Penguin Random House in 2021, and in fact got to the top of the bestsellers charts on Amazon in the category of business forecasting and planning, and that was worldwide. So it actually has done very well for Penguin, this book. But in the first chapter, I talk about two philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, because Plato thought you could sit under a tree and you could think about the future. And if you were clever enough, you could come up with an ideal model of what the world was about and what would happen. Aristotle, on the other hand, says there was no ideal model. You had to actually spend your life looking around you and absorb the experiences that you were going through. And as those experiences came in, you evolved your model and changed it. And I thought these two philosophers illustrated the metaphor I've been using with a lady called Chantal Ilbery ever since we wrote the book, The Mind of a Fox, in June 2001. There was a Oxford Don in the 60s called Isaiah Berlin. He wrote a book called The Hedgehog and the Fox, and he quoted Archilochus, a Greek poet, who said, "The hedgehog knows one big thing, whereas the fox knows many little things." And we both thought, Chantal and I, this was a superb way of illustrating the difference between people who try and forecast the future with one forecast, and then they bet all their money on their single forecast, and they're hedgehogs, and they can be right. Sometimes that one idea is magic, but very often they're wrong. And foxes who have an idea of how the future unfolds, but are prepared to change, just like Aristotle said, their views on the future. And they look at different scenarios and they change the probabilities as the future unfolds. So the methodology that I'm going to show you tonight is based on being a fox and looking at flags and multiple futures. What do I mean by flags? Well, they're the driving forces, the forces that are driving to the present into the future. And they're not short term. Some of the flags I'm going to quote you have been around in my portfolio since the late 80s and the 90s, and one or two I've added recently. So the idea that flags come and go, if you're a good futurist, they kind of stay in your portfolio and you adjust the view of those flags. And then obviously you have some flags which are very uncertain, and I call them the cloudy flags, and they have a multiple diversity of futures attached to them, like the wars in Ukraine and Israel at the moment. And you have clockwork flags, which are ticking away and have trends into the future, such as the aging of the world's population. And it's such a simple model, is to say to people, you know, what are the flags that you should be watching, not only obviously in the general sense of the global flags and the South African flags, but the flags that may really impact on your wealth, may impact on your family. In other words, you've got to have the conversation, as Abdul said, in a kind of team spirit sense, where you actually talk to one another about the flags so that you can actually select the ones that are most relevant to your future. And a couple of points I always make about the flags is that they're there to spike emotion, because a lot of us look at the future in a very emotional way. And actually, you've got to try and drain that emotion, because you've got to look at the future objectively. And one of the ways of spiking that bubble of emotion is to select the flags properly. And the second thing is, as my mentor, a wonderful futurist called Pierre Wack, a Frenchman, said, he was the head of scenario planning at Royal Dutch Shell during the 1970s, and then became a consultant to my company, Anglo-American, in the 80s. He said, it's much better to be vaguely right than precisely wrong. You know, that is so important. And it's why, for example, I always advocate a diversified portfolio of shares and bonds and different currencies, as opposed to betting on a single horse, and thinking that you can be precisely right about that particular horse. With that in mind, what are the flags that over the last 10, 15 years I've been talking about with clients around the world, the ones that are, in my estimation, changing the world economy. And the first flag, which has been top of the list for a very, very long time, has been the religious flag. I remember it first went up in 1988 when Pierre's deputy, a wonderful man called Ted Newland, who was also in the Shell scenario team, said in 1988, he said he had been listening to a Saudi expert at a conference in London who was detailing what was being taught at fundamentalist Islam schools in Saudi Arabia at the time. And he said, this is a recipe for war. And in fact, religion could dominate the world for the next 50 years. Now, at the time, we kind of said, huh? You know, there were the Crusades. and really, in the last century, we've really had nothing to do with religion. But this flag has actually been very, very important. You had the hijackings of aircraft in the 1990s. You then had 9/11, happened in September. In fact, we've just had the anniversary of that event on September the 11th, 2001. And indeed, in the book I referred to earlier, The Mind of a Fox, we had a letter to George Bush in which we said, as president, you've got to think like a fox. And the most important flag for you to watch is a massive terrorist strike on a Western city, which could happen at any time. And it happened 3 months after we published the book. But I've had a much more recent experience of this flag because in an article I wrote for News 24 in July 2023, I wrote the following words about the flag. I said, the religious flag resulting from the major religions of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism competing more intensely with one another. This flag led to 9/11 in September 2001 and is now focused on the current unrest in Israel and the likelihood of Iran developing a nuclear bomb. And of course, 3 months later, the flag went up with the invasion by Hamas of Israel and the terrible massacre that took place, and of course the abduction of hostages and all the things which are in the news at the moment. And that point that was made about actually having a discussion around a flag is so important because there was a woman in the Israeli intelligence corps who, with her team, were on the borders of Gaza and actually witnessing the changes in tactics of Hamas around about the time that I wrote this article in July 2023. And she raised it with her bosses in military intelligence. And they didn't have a discussion. They just said, this is an imaginary scenario that they will mount an attack on Israel. So that is why it is so important to actually have a discussion around the flag, get people together. And that's what should have happened at the time. I had put this flag right at the top of my list because in the middle of 2023, Israel was very much weakened by the division over whether Prime Minister Netanyahu's idea of weakening the judiciary was a good one or a bad one. So that there were demonstrations in Jerusalem at the time. And the second point was that there was continued grabbing of land in the West Bank by Israeli settlers to the rising fury of Palestinians. And that combination meant for me that the flag had moved to Israel. So that is the key point about a flag. It can be there a long time, and you've then got to kind of look at sub-flags that can be attached to that principal flag of religion. Now, where is that going to go now? It's been a terrible, terrible experience for both Israeli Jews and for Palestinians. We've seen the wreckage of Gaza, but of course, you know, there's a lot of terrible stuff going on inside Israel itself. It's a terrible thing about terrorism. It's not like the old days where you had armies facing each other. It's a single individual doing something, and it's very difficult always to pick up what that person is doing. So I feel for everybody involved in this conflict. And of course, the major uncertainty around the flag is whether this is going to develop into a regional war, particularly because of my second point of Iran being very close to developing nuclear weapons. Whether, in fact, there will be some kind of peace deal, and it's been talked about for a long time, involving the exchange of hostages for Palestinian prisoners and a ceasefire, which might develop into a permanent ceasefire. It's very difficult at the moment to decide. And all you can do is watch this flag and read the news each day and discuss it and see what you feel is the case. I have to say the financial markets on the whole have ignored the impact of this war on, the American economy or European economy or any other economy, other than obviously the countries directly involved. But if it develops into a regional war, it certainly could impact on the global economy because of disruption to trade and shipping, which has already occurred, but it's in a fairly minor way. It's not major at this point in time. So, yeah, the religious flag remains the number one to watch. The second flag is the leadership flag. People are surprised that I kind of rank this one so high. But I always remember my father telling me that in the 1930s, he was a young management trainee in Midland Bank in London. He was working his way up through the system. And then suddenly, because there was this young leader in Germany called Adolf Hitler, his life was completely changed when he was drafted into the British Army in 1939. Thankfully, he survived the war, and in 1945, he actually took up a different occupation of stockbroking. But it really showed to him how important it is to survey the kind of leaders around at the time that you're alive. I mean, we were very lucky to have F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela in the early 90s as our leaders, because it avoided the kind of scenario that you have in Israel at the moment. And again, at the end of the 1980s, you had Ronald Reagan, Maggie Thatcher, and Mikhail Gorbachev, and the three of them had a positive relationship. The Soviet Union disappeared, we actually had a short period of real peace in the world without any kind of Cold War, which obviously has now returned. But we very much are dependent on the leaders around at the time. And I said in this in the article I wrote in 2023, one of the real problems is the age of our leadership. I mean, you have Biden, of course, he's gone now. Well, he hasn't gone, but he's not standing in the next election. And as I kind of said to people, he wouldn't qualify for my retirement village at Helderberg. He's just too old. And thank heavens, to be quite honest, he stepped down and allowed Kamala Harris to be the candidate. But, who would want Donald Trump right now as the leader of the United States, with all his talk about strengthening the US dollar by imposing tariffs on any nation that didn't hold dollars, and his kind of really aggressive attitude to the rest of the world in order to make America great again. Then you have obviously Putin, who's an absolutely awful dictator. But she is just so different to Deng Xiaoping, who was an incredible leader. He liberated Chinese entrepreneurs. China, when he came to power in 1978, was nowhere in the global economy. And now it's the second largest economy in the world. And unfortunately, Xi has gone back to some old-fashioned principles of Maoism, and business has really suffered in China. And so you have to ask yourself, what are the kind of scenarios for leadership? Well, thank heavens, leaders die like everybody else. And maybe the next generation of leaders will, be more open-minded and try and work with one another in a way that our current leaders are not doing so. So it's a flag that we have to watch to see, who's next, and whether that particular person is positive or negative. Obviously, I'm weighing up Kamala Harris at the moment to see, whether she could make a great leader in the United States. The third flag I call the red flag, and it's of Russia, China, and North Korea. Now, Russia has been on the list since I wrote a book called Flag Watching in 2014, just after they'd had annexed Crimea. And I actually devoted 10 pages to the fact that what Russia was doing in Crimea and also was starting to do on the eastern side of the Ukraine could develop into a third world war with the United States. And that is still possible. I mean, right now, everybody's talking about whether America and Britain are going to cave in to Zelensky's request that he use long-range US and British missiles on Russia itself, reaching Moscow with these weapons. And some of them are incredibly, clever. They can fly very low and above the speed of sound, and they have incredibly explosive warheads. So it would be a massive escalation if the latest American and British missiles could be used by Zelensky. And who knows how Russia would react to that? I mean, there's been talk about Russia using a tactical nuclear weapon on Ukraine. It's kind of gone away at the moment. But that's why you have to watch this flag very closely, because, hell, if Russia did something like that, would that possibly lead to a much wider global war using nuclear weapons? China has its own problems. It's still wanting to bring Taiwan into the sort of mainland fold. Taiwan, meanwhile, obviously wants to retain its independence. So I watch every kind of event that's going around Taiwan, because, again, America has made it very clear that that could be an act of war by China if they take over Taiwan. And North Korea, well, Kim Jong-un has 50 nuclear weapons. That's the last estimate. And, this guy, he's so unpredictable. He's even more unpredictable than Donald Trump. And, he if he's really prodded by South Korea, will he use one of his nukes on a South Korean city? He's forever testing ballistic missiles. He did suspend it during Trump's reign as president, but he's now back to using kind of ballistic missiles and testing them in the ocean. So that is the third flag, and it's a very cloudy flag around Russia, China, and North Korea. The fourth flag is a real clockwork flag. It's the gray flag of the aging of the world's population. And I feel that this has to be a much more significant element of any discussion of where you should invest in the world, because aging really does impact economic growth. I remember Pierre Wack, that Frenchman I talked about earlier, saying to me in 1988, when we all thought Japan was the star of the world, he said, if ever they have a property crash, they will never grow fast economically again. They were growing at 7 to 8% per annum at the time. And of course, there was a property crash in 1990 in Japan and a stock market crash. And Japan has never grown again. 0.5% per annum. And the reason is simple. They're one of the oldest nations on earth. They have the highest percentage of people over 65. And I'm afraid to say, when you have an aging population, which is now declining in Japan, your economy starts to suffer in growth terms. Obviously, Japanese are still very well off in terms of income per head. And so life's not bad in Japan, but it's certainly, you've got to worry that they're never going to have a high economic growth rate again. Now, why is this important? Because Europe is going into exactly the same zone as Japan. It's an aging society. Look at what's happening in the UK, which, okay, it's not part of Europe now, but the UK national health is in a continual state of disaster. There are apparently 800,000 children waiting procedures in national health. And some people are waiting 3 or 4 years for surgery in the UK. Because, the place is being flooded with elderly people. And interestingly, the latest nation to start suffering in this way is China, because of its one-child policy that it had for many years. And in fact, the latest forecast is that their population could, in the next 50 years, decline from 1.3 billion down to maybe 800 million by the end of this century. And that will have an incredible impact on their economic growth rate. So, the one country which is still resilient because it's young is America. And that's why, since 2000, the American market has done so well. It's more than tripled in value, whereas the European markets haven't done nearly as well. So it is an incredibly important flag to consider when deciding where to invest. The next flag is probably the most existential flag in my portfolio. It's the green flag of climate change. I mean, you only have to look at the news today of these incredible fires in Southern California that are taking place, consuming whole communities. And then you've got a tornado in Louisiana, which suddenly increased its wind velocity well above what weather forecasters were talking about. Vietnam has had the most terrible typhoon. So, things are getting really unpleasant. And, I keep in touch with a few climate change scientists in America and elsewhere, and they now talk about atmospheric rivers. This is where what's happening in the outer atmosphere is you're getting a channeling effect where rain is being concentrated into streams. And then when that rain gets dumped, it's huge. And this is going to really impact where people live over the next 50 years. I actually think that people will start wanting to move from California because it not only has these terrible fires because of the heat in California, they also have terrible rains as well. And so it's going to affect property prices. It's going to affect lots of things, climate change, in the next 50 years. And so it has to be part of the discussion of the flags. I mean, there are places in the north coast of New Zealand and on the west coast of Australia where you can't get insurance anymore for your house or for your household effects because there's so much rainfall activity and flooding activity in those particular areas. So you have to start thinking of the impact of climate change on your portfolio. The next flag is the anti-establishment flag, which has really come about because the ultra-rich have got so much richer since the financial crash of 2008. But unfortunately, the middle class and working class haven't done well. In fact, I think it's NHS nurses are paid less now in real terms in the UK than they were earning in 2007, which is incredible. But, you know, there's a lot of anger around that. And it's leading to some fairly extreme views. And the other thing, which is the next flag I'm going to talk about, which is this whole thing of migrants coming into a country. And it's leading to a very different dynamic, particularly fueled by social media. And indeed, in Germany, the far right have won one particular province in Germany. And that is in itself a very big flag. And of course, in America, you have this kind of real conflict between the Republicans and the Democrats, and that's being fueled by social media too. So, you know, the whole anti-establishment flag now has to be watched in terms of the impact it can have on the political situation in a country. In fact, I think the UK government now wants to put in laws on antisocial behaviour because it's happening so much in the UK. The porous border flag is very much aligned to the anti-establishment flag. I did a session with Interpol in 2012 in Paris, and it was about what were the biggest threats to the world over the next 20 years. And I couldn't but be amazed that they chose as the number one threat, not drugs, not gun running. It was porous borders. That's what they called it. The fact that the southern border of America really had very little defense against immigrants from South America, and the fact that Europe had very little defense against immigrants from Arab countries and from Africa, and obviously it applied to the UK as well. And indeed, that's exactly what's happened. We've seen this incredible increase in migrants, and there's very little that can be done about it, because you can't start sinking boats or do anything like that. That would be a crime against humanity. But the boats keep coming. So nobody is quite sure how they're going to handle this particular flag. But of course, with climate change, the numbers of migrants could go from the hundreds of thousands to the millions, and maybe even reach 1 billion if places become really uninhabitable. The national debt flag is my next flag. I always just quote one statistic, which is right now, the national debt of America is around $35 trillion, and it's increasing at the rate of $1 trillion every 6 to 9 months because of the budget deficit in America. The GDP in America is between 27 and 28 trillion. So you've now got a national debt at 125% of GDP. Now, if you remember, in the last century, people were told that the ceiling should be around 60% of GDP. So America is now double the ceiling of the last century. And the question is, how could this possibly impact US treasuries? And obviously it applies to other countries with very high debt ratios too. So you have to watch this because, as we know, mortgages were a flag in 2007. And if you watch the movie The Big Short, there were guys there who knew that mortgages were worthless and then bet against them. And the same is sort of in the air now in terms of government bonds, government debt. How, I know you can print the money, but that will lead to more inflation. So the question is, how are governments going to handle this enormous increase in national debt, which came about partially through trying to ease COVID, but also there were plenty of years before COVID of easy money policy to try and boost the world economy out of the great financial crash. The pandemic flag, I'm still got on my radar because, yes, we're over the worst of COVID. The world markets have opened up again, but there's still a lot of COVID around. Not much here in South Africa, but California, there's a lot of COVID at the moment, and in Australia, there's a lot of COVID. And thank heavens that it's milder variants, but you've got to keep it on the radar screen because there might well be another virus that does exactly what COVID did, and so it's for the time being the threat's gone away, but I'm continually watching the news to see if there could be another pandemic. The second last flag is the crowded space flag, because all our international communication systems and banking systems require, satellites in space. And we've got so many satellites now orbiting in space. We've got so many rockets going up. I mean, the latest one is a SpaceX rocket, and there's been a moonwalk by a billionaire and one other person from the spaceship. I watched it this evening. Incredible. But the risks of a crash in space with fragments then dispersing and affecting other satellites must have risen in risk, and at some stage they're going to have to start legislating about space. They haven't done anything as yet, or indeed about the moon, but there's lots more activity going on in space, which will require some kind of order. And the last flag is quite a positive flag. It's the artificial intelligence flag. I mean, there was a Russian economist called Kondratiev who said every 60 years there's a new technology which really boosts the global economy, and then it reaches saturation point and it starts to come down, and then you have to wait for another technology. Well, the last technology was all about computers, which then obviously morphed into mobile phones and also into laptops and all the other stuff that we've become totally familiar with. But now AI is the next wave of technology, and we don't know yet what the real potential of AI is. Everybody talks about the downside, the fact that, my voice in talking to you, the algorithm of my voice can be worked out by AI, and I think somewhere between 30 and 45 seconds. And obviously they could probably do an algorithm of my space. So the end of the lecture could be completely done by AI. But there are lots of very good things that could come out of AI in terms of increasing productivity of both manufacturing companies as well as service companies. I know also people talk about it could boost the unemployment rate, but actually I regard AI as a very positive flag in terms of the future of the global economy. I have two mainframe scenarios that flow out of these flags. The first I call Gilded Cage, where the West sort of sits inside this cage, trying to protect themselves from illegal migrants and basically allowing the rest of the world to exist, providing it doesn't intrude on Western space. And of course, the Gilded Cage has led to BRICS, and Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now it's, of course, BRICS is widening its, its membership. And here the latest country that wants to join BRICS is Turkey, which is a NATO member, so that's quite interesting. But you're kind of looking at a bipolar world with sort of NATO and G7 and on the one side, and you have BRICS on the other side. And I certainly know that the Chinese want to introduce a BRICS currency, which would go completely against what Donald Trump wants, which is to allow the dollar to continue to dominate. I mean, I read one statistic, I think it was yesterday, that 60%, 60%, or no, I think it's more than that, 60 to 70% of the official reserves of governments in the world are still the dollar, and about 10%, 15% of the euro. So yes, the Western currencies still dominate, but BRICS could actually change that, and certainly would in the sort of a world of a gilded cage. The other scenario is in fact a friendly planet. Scott showed that diagram, so this would be the kind of scenarios on the right-hand side of that matrix, and you know, it's where we have new leaders, because as I said, I just don't see the current leaders that we have in the world actually getting together to create a more positive world where you can concentrate on the real issue, which is climate change and how the hell we're going to reduce, you know, carbon emissions and do other things in order to stop these very extreme weather events that are happening to us now. As far as South Africa is concerned,
just quickly, is this what
I have
this diagram here?
Oh, there it is. There's the slide. Absolutely, Scott. And there's, you know, the divided world at the bottom. You can see. Well, that is the gilded cage world, and the top is where we kind of move towards a friendly planet. And I'm afraid to say, as I said, the leaders would suggest at the moment where the scenario is the bottom portion of this matrix. And we'll need some new leaders, and maybe Kamala Harris will be just the kind of person to start moving the world in that direction. Now, what are the South African flags? And I haven't got nearly as many, so I won't be very long. Obviously, the crime and corruption flag has featured for a long time, I would say that I can be more positive about this flag now. I think that you know, there is definitely some action being taken to try and you know, reduce the level of corruption. But boy, oh boy, I'm still dismayed by the number of stories that are coming out, as we know, of some of the major political leaders that we have, and also you know, this devastating shortage of detectives in the South African police. So there's so much that has to be done in order to try and turn the crime and corruption flag into something that becomes more positive by actually going down the flagpole. The second flag is around the quality of infrastructure, because it is incredibly important for a high economic growth rate that you have a good infrastructure. I did a session with the Chinese Communist Party in 2006 in Beijing, and I was shown around the Central Party School, which was where we did this session, and they had quotes by Deng Xiaoping on the wall. And I said to one of the professors, why do you quote Deng Xiaoping? He said, because he said two things. We've got to have quality infrastructure, which will mean that we as a party must help the private sector in the bridges and the roads and the airfields and all the things that we have to build. And secondly, we've got to allow ordinary Chinese people to create wealth for themselves. And that's why this particular flag is so important. I think ESCOM is fantastic that we've seen, you know, what can be done with some good leadership. It's definitely in a much better state than it was a year ago. We've now got to apply exactly the same thing to obviously Transnet, and to all the other infrastructure, including water. Water is becoming an issue, a big issue at the moment. And there's kind of news that 2,400 educational jobs are going to be lost in the Western Cape due to lack of finance. It's terrible, because a critical part of the infrastructure is the education system of a country, as well as the health system. And again, we certainly don't want some kind of NHI, which is going to erode the quality hospitals in this country and the quality care that people are getting. We have to obviously spread the healthcare wider in this country, but it must not be done in a way that undermines the entire system. The third flag I've had on my portfolio for a long time, it's the entrepreneurship flag. The fact that we were at the political crossroads in the 1990s. We're now at the economic crossroads of the country. And we've got to create a much more entrepreneurial economy, so that small businesses in the townships and in the rural areas and everywhere have the kind of support systems to thrive. I would love the major banks in this country to get together, because I don't think that any single bank will do it, to do something which is not the VBS that we had, that dreadful disaster, but like the Grameen Bank in Bangladesh, which specializes in small business loans, and has done very, very well. And indeed, the person who started Grameen is now the sort of leader of Bangladesh. We need something like that in this country to help business. I'd like to see a much more positive relationship between big business and small business, where an element of the supply chain of big business is devoted to helping companies, small businesses in the area of the factories that the big business has. I'd like to see e-stock exchanges in this country, where every single city in South Africa has its own e-stock exchange, where you can register your business and promote it on that thing and get crowdfunding to pursue that business. We've really got to think in very different terms about the importance of entrepreneurs, because I'm afraid to say big business is no longer the big job creator that it was of the last century, because of automation. And I'm afraid to say, I think AI is going to play a role too. So you want to create 5 million jobs in South Africa, you're going to have to create 1 million new businesses. The future of GNU is now a very important flag. I had the 2024 election flag and the 2023 article. Now it's the future of the GNU, which right now, right at this point in time, people are worried about, because of this difference between the ANC and the DA over the Basic Education Law Amendment bill, which Cyril is going to sign tomorrow. And, you know, the DA has made it clear that it might actually leave the GNU if that happens. So, boy, I'm waiting with bated breath on this, because I wrote an article called Pragmatism just after Cyril announced the GNU, saying the most important thing that South Africa needs is a government that really works properly and delivers the results. It's no longer about ideologies and rhetoric and all the stuff that we've had for years in South Africa. It's about making the place work. In that sense, there was a lovely scenarios produced by the Indlulamini Trust, Miti Trust, where they talked of the weaver's nest, and I thought that was a very good metaphor. You know, that it's all about trying to build a nest from the bottom up, not from the top down. That you can do that politically, design a new constitution as a small group of politicians, but for the economy to grow, it's all about growing it from the bottom up, which means that we have to have good provincial and local government. And of course, at the moment, the stories coming out of Swanee and other municipalities of the kind of fighting going on between the DA and the ANC and other parties, it's terrible, because you want to have that economic revolution in this country. It's going to be because everybody starts putting the nest together and forgetting about those ideological differences. And the last flag is an international flag for South Africa, the neutrality flag. We must continue to be able to trade with the United States and with Russia and with China. And of course, this becomes more difficult in this gilded cage world that we live in. It's essential that we kind of maintain the kind of export markets that we've had for many years, and indeed widen those export markets, because as we all know, high economic growth rates are associated with countries that are successful exporters of their products and services. So there are two scenarios which I've had for some time and are in the book that I showed you earlier on, Thinking the Future: people's economy, and whether we actually do start working together to produce that kind of entrepreneurial economy I'm talking about. And of course, the second scenario is a slow decline I call cautionary tale, which ends up in us being a failed state, and worse still, even a wasteland. That would be so terrible, that we created the democracy against all expectations in the 90s, but we undid all that political progress because we suddenly went back to infighting, and the GNU disappeared. And it would be such a shame, because I'm still incredibly impressed by how many things work at ground level in South Africa. You go to the shops, people work in teams. It's extraordinary how you still have, particularly in the private sector, that kind of team spirit which you simply don't see amongst the politicians. And so I'm giving a 50-50 on that, on those two scenarios at the moment. And I just hope that GNU holds together, but obviously we're going to have to wait for the news tomorrow about what happens. And I'd like to end with a benediction for all of you who've been listening to me. Whatever the scenario for the world or South Africa is, may the fox be with you. Thank you very much.
Clem, as always, that's absolutely amazing. I have absolutely no idea how we're going to do the question part, because there are so many questions from all different, in all different places in terms of it. But as always, absolutely fascinating. I do highly recommend that if people want to, go read the book, because the book will really give you great insights, thinking the future in terms of everything that that Clem has said. And then there are actually articles that you can find that, just Google them in terms of the latest updates and everything. But it's been fascinating for me listening to what you've been saying, but also going against, as an example, someone asked about India. And last year you wrote under the grey flag, you said India also has a young demographic profile, which means you could be heading for the top of the global economic rankings in the second half of the century.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's changed in 2024, but certainly what you said last year. So my suggestion with everyone, and I deeply appreciate all the detail. What we're going to do now is we're going to pivot into the VIP room, and what Shane has kindly done is he's gone and put all the questions in. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do it, because there's 81 questions that have been posted here in terms of everyone's questions. So you've got the ability. What I would recommend, if you want to join us, is come and join us. Literally, you go to this link. Shane has put the link in. You join up, and literally you'll get the link. All our mastermind members and Wealth Hacker members will get it automatically, and we're going to join in the private Zoom room in terms of where we're at. And just to finish off before we go to that room, I just wanted to share I'm sharing my slides. I just wanted to share some pointers in terms of where we're at. Not for today, but next week I'm going to be hosting a masterclass on the 9 steps to creating generational wealth. We do work with a family office in terms of this process. They manage 65 of the wealthiest families. It's exactly what you were talking about, Clem, in terms of that top 1% getting wealthier since 2008. And something we're very passionate about is how do we help everybody invest like that top 1%. So I'll be taking people through this 9-step process. And just to give you an example, I wanted to play a little video. This lady here, Cynthia, is a teacher. And her, my philosophy in life is that people will say, oh, but it's not for me, I can't do it, and my philosophy in life is, no, you very much can. And so before we pivot into the Q&A, I just wanted to share this little video with you because I think it's imperative to understand what is possible and how one can diversify and invest. There's a great thing that we move 5 times more away from our problems than we do towards our pleasures. So we tend to take action because the problem's not pleasure. So what were the problems or challenges you were facing?
Yeah, the problem was huge. The problem was I'm living in a foreign country. I can't go back into my old career, which was China media, because I'm living in Italy. I had 3 kids to feed. I'd left my husband. And I was like, where's my skill set? So I was actually at the stage of like, just how do you put food on the table? And I, found a place to live, suddenly had 5 income streams, and all 5 of those income streams dried up during COVID. And it was the first time it hit me that I was working for money, selling my time for my hours for time, and that my money wasn't working for me. And COVID and that incident and that realization happened at the same time that 20-year fund came to maturity. And I suddenly had a chunk of cash. It wasn't a lot of cash by any means, but you got to start with what you start with. And I was in that frozen position of like, what do I do with it? Like, I need this money to work for me because I'm over here scrambling to find a job and to put food on the table for the kids. I was really at that paralyzed, what do I do? What do I invest in? I've read enough, read The Motley Fool every week for 30 years. I thought I was relatively financially literate, but I was frozen. I was just like, what do I do with it? I was just saying, it was just at that age, where my kids are 20, they can make fiscal mistakes. And I was at that age where I felt like I don't have another, ride it out 20 years and the stock market always rebounds. I don't have another 20 years to ride it out. Like I had to do that's what my fear was.
A lot of people talk about wealth protection, and that's what I'm hearing. It's one thing to grow your capital, but you also want to protect the capital you've worked, so hard to create over the years. Why did you choose to work with us? What was it that attracted you?
I had finally found people that were exactly like me, like from multiple parts of the world, maybe dealing in multiple currencies. We have, some gentlemen in the mastermind that might be South Africans. They're living out in New Zealand. They, the typical, the old fashioned 5 flags. You live in one country, you earn money in another, you've got a bank account in a third, you pay taxes in a fourth. And it doesn't really exist anymore, but it was very hard to find, like-minded people who understood different parts of the world and who naturally understood diversification. And the mastermind narrowed that down and made it even more specific, diversifying across time and currencies and assets, is even more focused. But just the general idea of diversification. I mean, all my European friends just invest in European things and all my American friends just invest in US things. So I really liked that. And then I liked the overall philosophy that we were trying to make what's available to the 1% available to the average person. And that really resonated with me because no matter how much you learn, you're always thinking, what's that little bit I don't know? What's that part of the puzzle I don't know because I'm not, a high net worth individual. Phenomenal. You have a half an hour free Zoom meeting with them and with the president in the room, not just someone who's going to execute. And they say, what's your story? What are your needs? What's your financial situation? And I pulled up that, matured, fund that I had and said, I need to invest this, but I can't invest it for the long term. Here are my needs. I have immediate goals. I have 3 children that have just gone off to college. So I suddenly have immediate financial goals that I'm not going to be able to meet if I keep just relying on my income or selling time for money. And they listened. They asked really smart, relevant questions I wouldn't have thought of, but they were particular to me. And I didn't feel like I was being put into a box of, you're this type of investor, or you're this type of investor, or you're this type, And it wasn't just the like, are you high risk? Are you low risk? It was really they really tried to understand my needs. And within 24 hours, they had a proposal to me that said, here's what we're going to do to get you money right now. And then here's what we're going to hold off on and keep discussing and think about and get you into eventually. But here's what we're going to do to solve your immediate problem. And within 1 month, I had income coming in from an investment from them, which just liberated me. I mean, it was just the buffer I needed to not panic about money anymore and to make the rest of the decisions slowly and, from a different mindset. It's a safety net that's just, unbelievable to me that someone who is not by any means a high net worth individual can have your money working for you, can have my money working for me and give me that peace of mind.
Yeah.
But there really isn't anything like finding the partnerships that we have in this group. I mean, there is no way, for all of my love of reading financial documents and being on financial websites and blogs, there isn't any way I would have ever found the partners to invest with and to invest in without being in this group. There's just no physical way I could have ever, industrial buildings in Texas or, healthcare centers in Brisbane. How am I going to find those sitting here in the middle of Europe? So, yeah, I think the partnership is the number one reason to join the mastermind. It's not just about the knowledge. It's about how do you execute, but you can't execute unless you have the deals in front of you. And you can't have deals in life, in any aspect of life, unless you have good partners. And it's a partnership that I would highly recommend people to, it's worth the entire investment. I would say jump. I mean, when I think of where I was 1 year ago, it's a million miles away. And not just because I have income coming in, but knowing what my next steps are. Like, I know where I'm going. I know where the next chunk of money is going to go into. I know what, I want to invest in. I know what I don't want to invest in. And I know the partners that I want to do it with. And that's just a huge weight off anybody's.
There you have it. I'm a big believer in real people, real stories. So in conclusion, if you do want to sit with one of our team members and do an investor strategy session, literally go to that page, wealthuniversity.org/VIP. Myself and my partners would happily sit down and help. Secondly, we've got the presentation next Wednesday, the 18th of September, where I'll literally take you through the 9 steps. It is free and you can join. And then lastly, if you want to use, and Clem, you used AI, if you want to use our AI navigator, go in and it'll literally help you in terms of the next steps. I want to leave you with one final person, and it's a farmer out of South Africa, and also interesting in terms of where one looks. People say, I can't do it. I don't have the challenges. I don't have the money, etc. And this year has actually been a very bad year in terms of crops in South Africa. And he just talks about the importance of diversification to him.
Scott, can you remember when you were a little kid and it was Christmas morning and you opened your Christmas presents? Huh? Can you remember that? That's what I feel like.
I have a little kid, so I get reminded quite regularly at the moment.
I tell you what, amazing. And I only just got a few dollars back in my investments again. It's the second payment I got in that I've seen on my wallet, and it's money that I didn't have to slog for. I had to think for it, but I didn't have to slog for, and it's absolutely fantastic. It's just when you start seeing your money work for you, it's just an absolutely indescribable feeling. And as a farmer now, I've got a very specific goal, which says that I need to build alternate income streams so that the weather doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because that's being a crop farmer, the weather matters very much, and particularly this past year, when your income for a year is only 30% of what your expenses have been, you're in a difficult position. And to be energized and as excited as what I am in that position is incredibly empowering. Thanks, Scott.
Anyway, real people, real stories. I think enough. It's time to pivot now to the VIP. I'm literally going to jump in the room with Clem. I'm going to try go through the answers. I do remind you, if you want the right information, the right partners, along with the VIP, you'll get Wealth Going Global and you'll get Asset Mastery, which is literally $29. And I know, Clem, I love always your sayings and your proverbs. I love this African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Thank you, Scott Picken and team from Wealth Migrate, for creating this program. May everybody watching this learn and take in and want to know more. If you would like to know more, feel free to reach out to me. My links, my details, and more details will be in the description. Enjoy your journey and may you be blessed beyond your wildest dreams. I am. Love, Maria.